Today we are going to be introducing and talking about stem changing verbs. So turn to page 30 in your packet. Should be a blank page for you to take some notes on. All right, before we get started talking about the stem changing verbs, you kind of need to understand a couple of vocabulary words. One is the stem. When we say stem changing verbs, you have to identify the stem of a verb. And the stem of the verb is the first part of the Spanish verb without the AR, ER, or IR on it. Conjugate. We've done this several times with AR, ER, and IR regular verbs, and you're going to do the same thing here with stem changing verbs. You must change or manipulate the verb to match the subject. So that means stem changing verbs, you must change the Spanish verb stem and still conjugate it. So you're really going to make two adjustments for these verbs. All right, so in order to conjugate verbs, you're going to have to recall how to conjugate AR, ER, and IR verbs from last trimester. So for AR verbs, it's o, as, a, amos, ais, and an. For ER and IR verbs, o, ace, a, amos, ais, and ain. For IR verbs, it's o, ace, a, emos, ease, and ain. If you remember these already, you don't need to write them on page 30. If you're having a hard time recalling that, you might want to jot those down. All right, there are three types of stem changing verbs, and if you flip back over to 29, you can see I've got them in columns in these categories. O to UE, E to I, and E to IE. So how do you know what letter in the stem you are going to change? There are several rules, so I want you to write down these rules. Okay, the rules are in yellow. So how do you know what letter to change? Well, it will be either one of the O's or one of the E's only. You won't change any other letter except for one O or one E. The exception to that is jugar. So in the list of verbs that I have here, it's going to be any of the ones that are green. Have the possibility of changing because only O's or E's get stem changed. So mostrar, you already know it has to be that O. In almorzar, you know it has to be that O. Dormir, you know it has to be that O. And the rest are still uncertain. All right, another rule for how to figure out what letter to change is that it cannot be an O or an E in the suffix, which the suffixes are AR, ER, and IR. It also cannot be an O or an E in the prefix, as in re, con, co, dis, un, or pre. So knowing that it can't be the prefix or suffix, you know it can't be any of the yellow letters. That means the only O or E you have left in recordar is the O. All right, another rule is it will never be the first letter, even if the first letter is an E or an O. So that means it will never be the E in encontrar or the suffix, because that rule still applies. It won't be the E in entender, or it won't be the prefix of re or the suffix of R in recomendar, or it won't be the E in empezar or the suffix of R at the end. So encontrar, knowing we've eliminated the first E and the suffix, the only thing it can change is the O. Same thing with volar. The only thing that can be changed here is the O. All right, there's another rule. If there happens to be two O's or two E's, once you've eliminated the prefix, the suffix, and the first letter, you're going to change the O or the E that's closest to the end. So it can't be the prefix or the first letter. It can't be the suffix. And if there's more than one letter, you're going to choose the end one. So encontrar, you've only got one. Recordar, you've only got one. Okay? But here, recomendar, it's going to be this E. And it's going to be this E and this E. So it's pretty easy once you follow these rules to figure out which letter you're going to change. All right, another rule is E to I stem changers are always IR verbs, except the verb venir, preferir, and saintir. So if you look at page 29, the E to I stem changing column is in the middle, and it's quite small. You can see that all of those are IR verbs, every single one of them. The exceptions are venir, which is in the E to IE column, preferir, which is also in the E to IE column, and saintir, which is also in the E to IE column. Okay, so again, looking at these, segir is going to be an E to I because it's an IR verb. Desir will be an E to I stem changer. Servir, repetir, and conseguir will all be E to I stem changers. All right, the last rule that you need to know about stem changing verbs is that you never stem change the nosotros or nosotras conjugation or the vosotros and vosotras conjugation forms. In other words, everything that's in yellow on this chart, you do stem change. Everything that's not yellow, the nosotros and vosotros boxes, you leave alone. You only conjugate them like a normal AR, ER, and IR verb. That's why the stem changing verbs are sometimes nicknamed as boot verbs because it sort of looks like a boot or at least a leg with a foot on the bottom. So let's take the word dormir, okay? You know it has to be an O to UE because you only change O's or E's, and that's the only letter that can possibly change. And since the three categories are O to UE, E to I, and E to IE, O's can only change to UE. So when you conjugate it for yo, it's yo duermo. You change the O to a UE and you add your normal O ending for IR verbs. For tu, it's duermes. Again, the O changes to UE and you add your normal ES conjugation. For he, she, it, or you formal, it is duerme. The O changes to a UE and you add your normal E. Out of the boot, you don't stem change it. So it's dormimos. You conjugate it like a normal IR verb. Same thing with the vosotros. Conjugate it like a normal IR verb. So it's dormis with the accent over the I because it's an IR verb. Now we're back in the boot. And so the O becomes a UE again. And you conjugate it for they or y'all or it plural, duermain. All right, on page 29, next to the vocabulary words, please write the definition. All right, almorzar means to eat lunch. We had a verb to eat, comer, and that's just generic. But if you specifically want to say, I eat lunch at noon, you would use almorzar. And all of these on this slide happen to be O to UE stem changers. So the U or the O in the middle becomes a UE. Contar kind of looks like to count, so that's somewhat of a cognate. Costar, definitely a cognate. It means to cost. Now, because we're only going to be talking about things and their costs, you will only use the it singular and it plural of costar ever, because we don't buy and sell human beings. The next one, encontrar, looks like encounter, and it means to find, so you definitely can make a connection there. Jugar is a little bit unusual in this column because it's not an O to UE, but it's a U to UE. It still follows the same procedures, but instead of changing an O, you're going to change the U to a UE. Jugar means to play games or sports. Mostrar means to show. Volar means to fly. So I always think of the word like aviation, and I always hear the V, so I just remember the V, the volar starts with the same letter, for to fly with the V in aviation. Poder means to be able. However, when you conjugate it, most of you don't say, I am able to swim. You change it in English to say can. I can swim. I can study. I can do things, which is different than just doing them. You're saying that you are able to do them. Yover, you can draw a thin line through yover, We will study this with the weather unit because it means to rain. And once again, you're only going to use the it singular because I can't rain, we can't rain. Only the weather can rain. Soñar is to dream. Has a tilde over the end, so don't forget that when you conjugate it. Dormir, as our example that we just conjugated it, was to sleep, and it looks like a dorm, or something is dormant, like a bear or a tree. Volver means to return. So I always just think of a revolving door. If you stay in it, you leave and then you return, and you leave and you return. So volver is like revolving door. Morir means to die, and once again, you can draw a thin line through that because you will never use that in the present tense. You will only use that verb later on in Spanish 2, 3, and 4 in past tense. He died in 2002. And recordar looks like to record, and in essence it is, but it's when your brain records something, so it means to remember. All right, so all of these are O to UE stem changer verbs. The middle column is really short, and a lot of them are cognates. These are all E to I stem changers because they're an IR verb. Repetir means to repeat. Decir means to say or to tell. It has the word yo behind it because it also has an unusual yo conjugation, which we'll explain later. Pedir means to ask for, not to ask. That was preguntar. So this is to ask for. So I ask for money, or I ask for the answer. And I always just think of if you're out to dinner with your sweetheart, you might say, will you pay, dear? You're asking for them to pay. Rainier means to quarrel. Draw a thin line through that. You just won't really use that word very much even in English, so we're not going to worry about it in Spanish. Servir, cognate, looks like to serve. Conseguir means to get or to obtain, and draw a thin line through it. We'll study that with irregular verbs a little bit more often. And to follow, seguir, also draw a thin line through it. We will study that verb more when we get to the irregular verb unit. All right, E to IE stem changing verbs. Comenzar, always have to have an after it, means to begin. You can cross that one off because the last word on our list also means to begin, and it's really the one they use more often. Pensar means to think. So if you're pensive, you're very thoughtful and you're, very meticulous in doing things because you're thinking it through. Preferir is an E to I stem changer, even though it's an IR verb, and it's to prefer, so the definition is really easy. Querer means to want, and the way that I remember this is there's a Taco Bell commercial, which maybe I'll play for you later, and a little chihuahua says, yo quiero Taco Bell. I want Taco Bell. Tener, which we introduced with the family unit, means to have. And again, it's an E to I stem changer, and it also has an unusual yo. Venir is an IR verb exception, also has an unusual yo. It's actually conjugated like the verb tener, means to come. Cerrar means to close. Nevar, you can draw a thin line through it because we will study that with the weather unit, means to snow, and again, only for it singular. Sentir, really, the only time you'll ever use that more than likely is, in Spanish 1 anyway, is lo siento, I am sorry. And again, sentir means to be sorry or to be regretful or to regret something. Recomendar looks like to recommend. That's exactly what it means. 2 M's in the English version. Perder, lose. Maybe you lose a pair of pants. Perder. Entender means to understand. So don't get that mixed up with comprender, which means to comprehend. And empezar, always has an after it, means to begin. So instead of comenzar, we're going to use empezar. All right, conjugating the verbs at the bottom. Almuerzo, almuerzas, almuerza, almorzamos, almorzáis, almuerzan. Tengo, tienes, tiene, tenemos, tienes, tienen. Repito, repites, repite, repetimos, repetís, repiten. and then conjugate the verbs found on